Hey y'all, Titan Preparedness back again with another what if video. Today's video we're going to be discussing something that not a lot of preppers have talked about on their channels. This is an event that lasted for 5 to 7 years. This is an event that changed the American way of life. This is an event that helped cause stagflation. This is an event that helped change the big three automakers. This was the gas crisis. When I say gas shortage or gas crisis, you're probably thinking of 2021, where we had the Colonial Pipeline attack. And for 2 weeks, gas was short. People were running up to the pump and getting as much fuel as they could. However, that only lasted for about 2.5 weeks max. And we made it through. Yeah, it was a little annoying getting gas and having to call the gas station beforehand, but we made it through. Now you take that event and stretch it out over a 5-year span. That is what we're talking about. The gas crisis of the 1970s. So for this video, we have to go back in time almost 50 years. We have to think like they did 50, 60 years ago. So in 1970s, the national average miles per gallon was 12 miles to the gallon. And these weren't large SUVs, these weren't large pickup trucks. These were mostly cars. Your family-sized car was getting a national average of 12 miles to the gallon. In 1972, the U.S. was importing almost 16 million barrels of oil per day. 1973, that number dropped down to 8. And it stayed that way for many, many years. So what caused this event? In the 1970s, the U.S. was importing a lot of its oil from foreign nations, from the Middle East, the OPEC countries, the oil exporting countries of the East or the Middle East, much like we're doing today. So in 1973, Israel got involved in a conflict called the Yom Kippur War with one of these OPEC countries. The U.S., being an ally of Israel, of course, supported Israel. Well, the people that we were getting our oil from, OPEC, weren't fans that we were supporting the wrong team. So for our actions in the conflict, they decided to cut off our oil supply. So again, we went from 18 million barrels of oil to 6. We got cut by 2/3. Now, I'm not college educated by any means, and I'm not a professor in economics, but I understand supply and demand. When the supply drops and the demand is still there, the prices go up. So the main event we're talking about is a gas shortage. A subsequent event is the rise in prices on said gas. There was also gas limitations. You could only get 10 gallons at a time. You pulled up in your big family-sized vehicle with a 30-gallon tank, you could get a third of a tank. 10 gallons instead of 30. Now, something else that happened during this event was gas lines. We hear about them in Venezuela, we hear about them in these third world countries, we heard about them in 2021, but gas lines were a big thing. Everything you did revolved around the gas line. Everything you did revolved around getting fuel for that day. It wasn't just as simple as pulling up to a pump and grabbing 10 gallons and being on your way. No, you sat there and you waited. You could wait for 30 minutes, you could wait for an hour, you could wait for 3 hours. It just depended on how many people were in front of you. It also depended on how that gas station was set up to run its fuel systems. Was it based on your last name? Or was it based on your tag number? Were they doing evens one day and odds the next? It all just depended on what that gas station did. And normally if one gas station in town did it, another gas station in town did the opposite. That way you at least had a chance, an opportunity to wait in line. Doesn't mean you're getting fuel that day, it just means that you have the chance to wait in line. So again, this event lasted for almost 4 to 5 years. There was a gas shortage, the prices were higher, people had to sit forever, they could only get 10 gallons at a time. How did the people survive this 5-year event? The first thing that people did was they carpooled. A lot of people who were going to the same place or lived in the same town or worked in the same area carpooled. They would pack 4 to 5 people in their vehicle and they would go to work. So now let's say if it cost you 2 gallons per day to get back and forth to work. 5 days a week, that is 10 gallons a week and 40 gallons a month. If you carpooled with 3 other people, that only meant that instead of that 40 gallons per month, it was costing you 10 gallons per month. People carpooled. People rode bikes. People walked. Because they knew that just driving up to the store and back would cost a gallon of fuel. Again, you're looking at 12 miles to the gallon. It's not a lot. One of the major changes that came from this whole fuel crisis was that both the US automakers and the public stopped buying big vehicles. If you look at the history of the muscle car, 1972, 1973 was the last great year for a muscle car. Past that point, you lost anything that made a muscle car a muscle car. The Mustangs, the Chevy Camaros, the Dodge Challengers, Chargers lost their V8s. They lost their speed. They lost their muscle in muscle car. They became just cars. That's because no one could afford to drive around a big V8 muscle car that got 8 to 10 miles to the gallon. Instead, they were buying the imports. This is where you saw the rise in Hondas. This is where you saw the rise in Toyotas. This is where you started seeing Ford, Dodge, and Chevy rebranding these vehicles as their own, because there was partnerships with the foreign automakers, because their cars were getting so much better gas mileage than our cars. Now, something else that happened was a lot of national infrastructure changes. So, they implemented a national speed limit of 45 miles per hour. That is not very fast. But the idea was that if you go 45 instead of 60, instead of 70, instead of 80, you save fuel. There was a thing called non-idle zones. So if you pulled up to a red light, you were supposed to shut your vehicle off. Nowadays we pull up to a red light, we leave our foot on the brake, and we just sit there and we wait. Back then, you were supposed to shut your vehicle off. The idea is that you save fuel while that red light waits. There was a guy a lot smarter than me here on YouTube that said if you wait any longer than 8 seconds, you are wasting fuel. So something you could implement nowadays. That is why we have start-stop motors in a lot of these newer hybrid system vehicles. Any longer than 8 seconds and you're wasting fuel. The third thing that was implemented nationwide was coasting zones. The idea was that if you were on a hill, you parked it down into neutral and you coasted. You shut your vehicle off and you coasted down that hill. That again was supposed to save fuel. So what would I want, what would I need if I was in that situation? Again, this is not an apocalyptic situation, but here we are, 50 years later, doing the exact same thing that we were doing and expecting a different result. The first thing I would want is a more fuel efficient vehicle than what I'm driving. When Biden got elected, I went and traded my V8 SUV for a small subcompact car. I hate the fact that I'm driving something that's 3 inches off the ground, but I love the fact that it only cost me 15 bucks to fill up. But we saw this in 2008 when the recession hit. People were trading their large SUVs for Toyota Priuses, for Toyota Corollas, Camrys, Hondas, things that were getting better fuel efficiency. Why? Because it didn't hurt the American people as bad. Because it didn't hurt the people that were already hurting. You take your SUV and you go fill it up when gas is $5 a gallon, it's going to cost you 200 bucks. You're not going to go very far in it. You go fill up that Prius, it's going to cost you 30 bucks. And you can go the same distance, if not further. So the first thing I would want is a fuel efficient vehicle. Nowadays, that doesn't necessarily mean a gas motor. Nowadays, we have gas, we have hybrid drivetrains, we have plug-in hybrid electric vehicles, and we have electric vehicles. So a gas vehicle, your basic non-electrical gas vehicle, you're maybe getting 25, maybe 27 miles to the gallon max. A hybrid system. You see hybrid systems in a lot of different vehicles nowadays, everything from an F-150 to, of course, the Toyota Prius, the first hybrid that was mass marketed, to SUVs. Hybrid equals better fuel efficiency. Don't ask me how, I'm not a car scientist, but if you have a hybrid drivetrain, if you have a hybrid system, you get better fuel efficiency. Plug-in hybrid electric vehicles. These have batteries that are larger than what you find in a normal hybrid vehicle, but not as large as you find in a full-time electric vehicle. My vehicle is a plug-in hybrid. So I can plug it up and get 50 miles of electrical range and not have to kick on the gas motor. And I do this on a daily basis, whether I plug it up here at home or at my work. In my 8-gallon gas tank, I've gotten over 3,000, 4,000, almost 5,000 miles on 8 gallons of fuel. Then of course you have full-time electric vehicles. These are things like the Ford Lightning, the Teslas, Chevy Bolt. If there's a gas crisis, you don't have to worry about gas if you don't use it. Very plain and simple. As long as there's not a power shortage, you're good. As long as you can still afford to plug it up, whether that be at your home, whether that be at work, whether that be at some random store, you're good. You don't have to worry about gas because your car doesn't use gas. So some sort of fuel efficient vehicle, whether that be a hybrid or whether that be a non-gasoline vehicle, that is something I would want. The second thing that I would want, because I do live in a more rural area, is some sort of bike or e-bike. Bicycle, very plain and simple. You use manpower to move forward and move backwards without having to burn fuel. An e-bike, it has some sort of an electrical component, a battery, and you can use that, you can power that up, pedal for a little bit, and then kick it on. And they go 20, 30 miles per hour depending on the model. Now, they're more expensive than a bicycle, but you can go further distances with less energy used from your body. The third thing I would want is something that I would want if I couldn't get a more fuel efficient vehicle or get a bike, and that is skills. This goes back to World War II. Back during World War II, gas was one of those things that was on the short list as well. So people made do with what they had. They had skills, and they knew how things worked, and so they would build things like a wood gasifier. So you build up this system in the back of your truck that has wood in a metal container, and that is itself in another metal container. You light a fire underneath it. It does not burn the wood. Instead, it charges it. It gives off a gas. That gas goes directly to your tank. You can run your tank off of wood gas. It was something that they did back in the day. Yeah, it's not very economical. Yeah, it's not very eco-friendly, but it was something they did to get by through their shortage. Another idea, and this is if you drive a diesel, is using vegetable oil for your diesel vehicle. Now, a lot of the older diesels can take it. A lot of the newer diesels, not so much. But if you had a diesel vehicle back in the 70s, it could handle using vegetable oil, using motor oil as its fuel source. Think of how many restaurants you pass on a daily basis. If you pass 5 restaurants that have used vegetable oil and you go in there and you get 5 gallons apiece, that's 25 gallons of biodiesel you can burn. So that is a skill that would be needed if this event happened again. Now, how many vehicles nowadays would be able to use biodiesel or wood gas? Not sure. But if you had a 90s vehicle, if you had an 80s vehicle, if you had a 70s vehicle, they would work. So if this happens again, I would suggest you go get a fuel efficient vehicle or at least a bicycle, because you're going to need it. Alright guys, if you lived through the 1970s, tell me about your memories from it. Were you a teenager that was driving that had to cut back on your drives, or were you a kid sitting in the front seat at the gas pump? Let me know. That's all I got for today. Get you out.